Hi, welcome to the Bible Standard, where you are guaranteed in-depth Bible study and analysis. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop a comment in the comments area to have your say, and we'll do our best to reply.
So another year has passed since we were last together looking at the signs. And once again, many things have happened in the world, haven't they, to encourage us in believing that the time of Christ's return is drawing very near. And we say it often, but just reflect on this once more tonight. Can you imagine how many people in the world out there would love to know these things? Would love to know what's going to happen, how it's all going to end, and where all the things in the news are leading. They would love to know that there is someone in control. And we are so privileged and so blessed, aren't we, brothers and sisters, young people, friends, that we know these things. We have such a reason to be excited about these things. We know that these signs are the things of God, and these things revealed belong to us and to our children. They are part of a plan. And it was a plan laid out centuries ago in the time of Daniel, where there was a megalomaniac who had great sway and influence over the known world, a crazy man who went even crazier throughout his life. The power went to his head. And we know exactly, brothers and sisters, what that must have been like, don't we? We have one of those in our world too, don't we? And I'm going to try very hard not to make tonight all about Donald Trump. You can appreciate that's no mean feat when the influence this man has in the world today is quite staggering. Daniel's megalomaniac had a dream that set out an overview of this plan, which we tend to call Nebuchadnezzar's image. And of course, it's no accident that the image is of a man. We are looking at the kingdoms of men and the glory of mankind who basks in his own achievements. And in fact, when we look at the metals more closely, what we see is an escalation as we descend through the image. We see the metals get more abundant in the earth. Certainly in today's world, we can see from the figures of the metals that are mined today, just how abundant the metals get as we progress through the image. Not only that, they become stronger as we go down the image. They get harder to scratch as we go down the image, and they become more resistant to heat. Those are just 4 examples of the characteristics these metals have. And I think the point is that it's getting increasingly harder and harder as those metals go on to remove their influence from society. So as we look at them, we bear that in mind. And the final stage, of course, is the feat, where the iron and the miry clay do not mix together. At its base, this image is clay and iron, partly strong and partly broken, and that makes it extremely unstable, doesn't it? And we see this instability in the kingdoms of men, especially in what we've seen this year. And I just put the words up of a couple of reporters who commented on the kind of year it had been, that they had never seen a year like 2025, the year that finished. And also that Trump is shaking the world order more than any president since World War II, 80 years ago. These aren't my words. These are the words of professional news analysts. This is what they see when they look at these events. And this image is not going away. It will still be standing on that unstable base with all these influences from past empires deeply ingrained in society on the day when Christ returns. That's what we're looking for, that instability and those hard-to-remove elements of past empires. So with that introduction then, what signs have we seen in the news this year? And I'm going to split our consideration tonight into 4 areas. We have seen many things concerning these four areas. Firstly, Israel and the Jews, what's happening there in the land, but also with Jews all over the world. The theme of the northern invader, the coalition of nations that is assembling together, preparing for that incursion down into the land. The development in Daniel and Revelation of the Roman beast and what we've seen of that in the last 12 months. And then finally, a phrase in the Gospels, as it was in the days of Noah, a phrase Jesus used with the disciples to indicate trends in their own day. And we're going to see how that's relevant to us later on. And so we're going to fit the news of the last 12 months into this framework. We're going to fit it into this bigger picture of what the scriptures tell us. And we'll start then by thinking about Israel and the Jews. And the number one thing here, we expect that when Christ returns, Israel is going to exist as a nation. That might sound like an incredibly obvious point, but it's important because there are so many in the world that would rather Israel was pushed into the sea. But we believe when Christ returns, Israel will exist despite everyone's best efforts. And we see some of those efforts in the news of the last 12 months. So in the autumn, we saw the growing acceptance of a Palestinian state by many countries, including the UK and France. That hit the headlines in September last year. And this photo shows the UN meeting on the two-state solution that took place then. And the Prime Minister's statement at the time said that this recognition represents the best hope for a solution to this problem. It was echoed by many other world leaders as well. And this is the situation then that we saw back then in September. We saw that there are now many, many countries in the world that recognize the Palestinian statehood. And you can see all those purple circles represent countries. They're clustered together by continent. The purple ones represent countries that recognize the Palestinian statehood, including the UK. You might just be able to see, and sort of in the middle on the top there, the UK, and the vast majority of others. Notice, by the way, you may not be able to see it, but I'll tell you, the US, which is at the bottom of the cluster on the top left, is still grey. They do not recognize the Palestinian claim. But you can see just how many countries do, including the UK as of September last year. And some want to push it even further, of course. The Encyclopedia Britannica this year was forced to make an embarrassing U-turn on their decision to publish their map of the Middle East, which, as you can clearly see, removed the name of Israel entirely from the picture. We're not surprised by these things, are we? But it's quite shocking to see it there on their website. A two-state solution will, of course, never be accepted by Israel. That's what we saw in their response, which was quite simply, we will continue to kill the idea of Palestinian statehood. It remains the most intractable problem in UN history. But of course, that isn't the only thing going on in Israel. There's more as well. And we saw the situation in Gaza, which has deteriorated over the year. Last summer in particular, it was in the headlines because various proposals were being published about its future. There was to be a transitional Gaza authority, which was going to be run at one point by Tony Blair. And eventually, of course, Trump waded in. After all, he is a self-confessed real estate person at heart. If there's a deal about land to be done, he wants to be in there. He has that background, doesn't he, in real estate. But by the end of September, he'd proposed creating this board of peace, which involved many different countries. But of course, Trump himself is chair for life of this board. And whatever else he may be, he is largely on Israel's side. We believe that's probably the reason why he is in power in the first place. We know that he is on Israel's side. And the plan that he put forward states that Hamas would have no role in governance, directly, indirectly, or in any form at all. And Trump hit out at countries for foolishly recognizing Palestinian statehood. Remember all those purple circles we saw a moment ago? Trump said they were all wrong to do that, and that's why the US has remained a grey circle. But Trump is a crafty man, if nothing else. And the proposed charter of the Board of Peace does not mention the Palestinian territory at all, and appears instead to be designed to supplant functions of the United Nations. It's a rival to the UN. It mentions nothing to do with Palestinian territory, which is quite crafty after the way he celebrated its arrival in the news. By April, we saw that the New York Times reported there the growing frustration of Trump with the Hamas side of the deal. They issued a disarmament deadline. Problem is, of course, Hamas are terrorists. They don't do this negotiating thing very well. And Hamas, you may know, is a Hebrew word, in fact, which means violence or cruelty or wrong. It occurs many times in the Old Testament. There's just one example there on the screen from Genesis 6, where the earth was filled with violence in the days before the flood. Israel cannot make deals with terrorists, and the world has struggled to understand that. Gaza in Bible prophecy is usually included in the term coastlands of the sea or coasts of Palestine. We see one example of that in Joel chapter 3. And here in this prophecy of Armageddon, we can note that at the time of the end, it will be against Israel. And that certainly seems appropriate for how things are in that territory today. And meanwhile, in response to what the world is imposing upon it, Israel continues to defy international convention and builds more and more settlements in the occupied land. It builds in an accelerated way. And it said here, they're quite clear about this. They want to bury the idea of a Palestinian state. They're all about building because they want to show that they consider this disputed territory to be theirs. There appears to be little at the moment, humanly speaking, that can stop them from doing this. We would note that rising anti-Semitism all over the world is another sign of the end. And the events at Bondi Beach in December, which coincided with Hanukkah, caught the world's attention. But they were far from an isolated incident. And so many other occasions have happened since then. I can only name a few. In the UK, we might recall the shooting at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester and Golders Green in London, among others. Canada reported a huge increase in such incidents as well. In Britain in particular, schools seem to be a key location for where these attacks are happening. And one news outlet called this the global frenzy of anti-Semitism, saying that it is out of control in our society. And this is, of course, partly why the return to the land has been of such importance to the Jews. They desire a safe, peaceful haven from all of this persecution, and one day they will cry that they have it. But what they are building in the land will not prevent the invasion that we know will come to them. So let's move on then to the theme of the northern invader and consider what's happening there. And we have this wonderful chapter in Ezekiel 38, don't we, that gives us so many clues about this final invasion and who will be involved in it. And there are various maps that help with this, with our understanding here. We have this list of ancient nations in chapter 38 of Ezekiel. We can colour them in on a map. We can identify where they are and what nations they represent now. And we can colour code it so that you can see roughly. We have a red team and a blue team here on this map, if I can put it like that. And we can see how these things are going to play out. And what we have to do in our role as watchmen is to watch these alliances coming together, to watch how these nations are working together and what they are building together. And we especially notice what is happening in Russia. And in this northern corridor, directly north of Israel, we identify here Meshech, which we consider to be Moscow. And it broadly contains the root of that invasion which is to come. And so we're especially interested in this corridor here. Now, back in August, we had the much-hyped Anchorage conference where Putin and Trump met to discuss terms to bring an end to the war with Ukraine. And I've deliberately chosen this image because of the handshake. You might remember just how many articles were written about this handshake. I read many. People were trying to read into it all sorts of things. You can see Trump has his hand uppermost there. He had to fight Putin to make sure his hand was uppermost, but he managed it. And Putin's motive probably for this conference was greater acceptance of Russia's actions, the normalizing of his invasion of Ukraine. Trump's was, on the face of it, ending yet another war. He claims to have ended at least 7 in the time he's been in office. Actually, who knew what deals had already been done before this meeting even took place? And then there was poor Ukraine, wasn't there? Because President Zelensky wasn't even invited to go to this meeting. Imagine trying to bring about peace between 2 countries when only one of them is at the table. And Trump said, it's okay because I promise I'll call you afterwards to tell you how it went. And you can imagine what Zelensky made of that. Of course, in the end, there wasn't much to tell because 9 months later, we're still here. This war is still going on and not very much has changed. In fact, a French newspaper said at the time, the ball is in Europe's court. Europe, it said, must make a move now that this conference has happened, implying the need to stand up to Putin and come to Ukraine's aid. But it hasn't happened yet, has it, in a very effective way on behalf of Europe? That hasn't happened since August last year. We might ask why, and the answer has got a lot to do with Daniel chapter 2, in fact. And in January, as we go to expand that point, there was a summit in Davos where Zelensky and Trump agreed some security guarantees. And Zelensky stood up on the stage and he vented forth his frustration with Europe, that it was not giving as much support as it should to Ukraine. And just look at what he said. He said, instead of standing together against Russia, instead of becoming a truly global power, Europe remains a fragmented kaleidoscope of small and middle powers. And where have you seen that kind of language before? Well, you've seen it, haven't you, in Daniel chapter 2. Partly strong and partly broken. The nations that do not mix, that are unstable. That is the problem that Europe has, biblically speaking. So some are calling for a more allied Europe. Why can't Europe just get its act together, come to Ukraine's aid and sort this out? Well, this isn't a new idea, of course, is it? In fact, 2026 is the centenary year of the first pan-European conference to establish the United States of Europe. For 100 years, that's what people have been trying to do in this continent. Here is the Jewish Daily Bulletin from October 1926 that reported the Pan-Europe Congress. I appreciate that's going to be incredibly difficult for you to read. I will read out one relevant part of it just about here, where it says, the creation of the United States of Europe would be beneficial to the Jews as it would eliminate racial hatred and economic rivalry. What a hope that is. That a continent can come together and eliminate those things. So for 100 years, people have worked for a united Europe, working together to resist actions like Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Far longer than the EU has been around, 100 years. Well, in February 1930, Winston Churchill responded on behalf of Britain. Incidentally, I found out Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel is a big fan of Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill responded on behalf of Britain to this Pan-Europe Congress and this move that was afoot to try and bring Europe together. And do you know what he said? I'm not making this up. Love this. He said, we are with Europe, but not of it. That's what he said at the time. We are linked, but not compromised. We are interested and associated, but not absorbed. I think he'd been reading his Bible. And it brings us to the power of NATO here, doesn't it? And how NATO is weakening. Here is another big alliance of countries. And we see fascinating things happening with this group in the last few months. Here are the countries that are involved in NATO. You can see what a huge area of the globe this spans, not just Europe, North America as well. And you see, our understanding of prophecy would require that NATO will be completely ineffective, if not extinct, at the time of the end, because that coalition of nations in Ezekiel 38 that we referred to will be Europe on one side and Britain and America on the other side. And that's not what we see in green on this globe here. In fact, it splits the map completely in two, Ezekiel 38. That's where the divide is geographically in Ezekiel 38 on that map. You have one half working together and the other half working for the opposite. Well, what have we seen recently? We've seen comments on NATO. Trump has called it very disappointing, suggesting that it needs to have pressure placed on it in order to understand anything, which is quite a criticism, isn't it? German Chancellor Friedrich Merz warned that a split in NATO was perhaps on the cards. Donald Tusk, earlier this month, he's the Prime Minister of Poland these days, he used the word disintegrating, even stronger. NATO doesn't seem to have very much future. And other presidents in Europe have said that it's these comments that have damaged the alliance's credibility more than anything Putin has done. Because of these things that people are saying about it, its credibility is failing. Trump's office said at the end of April, despite everything the US has done for its NATO allies, they were not there for us. But it's okay, he said, because we have one of these. This is what he created back in September, didn't he? He's got a War Department. Now, I don't know how a chair of a board of peace can have a War Department in his government. Seems a bit inconsistent. And I tell you another thing, that is an office door that I would not like to knock on. But there is a NATO summit still happening later this year. It's happening in Ankara, in Turkey, in July, which is interesting. Nowhere near the North Atlantic is Turkey. But let's just focus on Turkey for a second and on its leader, Erdogan, if we put him up there. Turkey is seen as a good influence for regional stability. Turkey was asked by Ukraine to host peace talks recently between itself and Russia. It is one of the most powerful members of NATO. It's increasingly being seen as a defense partner, albeit an uncomfortable one. In the end, we know that it's not going to offer much defense against Russia, and here's why. It's in the path, isn't it, of Russia's invasion route to Jerusalem. It stands directly between the two. If it does put up any resistance, it's going to be crushed. We also know that Russia's shipping access to the Mediterranean goes through the land of Turkey, particularly the strait, the Bosphorus Strait near Istanbul. And we know from prophecy that the king of the north is going to come with many ships, so it's going to need some access to the sea. And you can see Turkey being a target here of Russia. And as we saw on the screen earlier with that map from Ezekiel 38, it makes sense that Togarmah, which has long been identified with peoples living in Turkey, is listed as allied with Russia or taken by her in that time of the end. We don't expect Turkey to be neutral at the end. But it's not just Turkey. There's a tiny country called Armenia here, also widely thought to be the home of the ancient Togarmans. And it borders Turkey on the east. It's considered Russia's closest ally in the region. And earlier this month, it held the first ever bilateral EU-Armenia summit. And Russia watched. So here's the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan in the centre, Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission on the left, and the European Council President, Antonio Costa, on the right. Russia will be with Europe when this final push comes, and maybe tiny Armenia will be something to do with the glue that holds it all together. We have to watch this space, don't we? Well, who else is in that alliance in Ezekiel 38, which has been in the news this year? We can't ignore them anymore, can we? We need to talk about Iran. listed as Persia in Ezekiel. And way back in June, nearly a year ago, we witnessed the military might of Israel in Operation Rising Lion, where they attacked Iran's nuclear facilities. During a 12-day war between Israel and Iran, the US carried out these airstrikes on uranium enrichment sites, Iran insisting that its nuclear program is entirely peaceful. Believe that if you will. And we're expecting to see this nation of Iran, Persia, in the time when Christ returns. It's part of that confederacy. So we've watched with interest what's been happening there over the last year, and much has been happening there. We went into lots of protests around the time of New Year, especially in the capital, Tehran. These were sparked off by the death in custody of someone called Mahsa Amini, a young woman who was accused by morality police of not wearing her veil properly. But these things tend to escalate, don't they? And we know what this led to ultimately. The attacks on Iran in February, the so-called US-Israeli war with Iran that is still going on, and the death of Iran's supreme leader, who had been in power since 1989. He was replaced then by his son, Mojtaba Khomeini, who was promoted to what must be one of the riskiest jobs in the world, a supreme leader. So we saw all that happen back in February. And then after that, we witnessed Trump becoming more aggressive as he failed to finish off the regime. He commented last month that a whole civilization would die if Iran missed that deadline for the negotiation. And many people noticed the link with the words he used, with the words Haman said in the book of Esther, that they be destroyed. Interesting that the outbreak of this war happened at the time of Purim, the feast that was instituted to mark Jewish deliverance from genocide. Some have pointed out that Khomeini contains the word Haman in it. One Jewish reporter said, Purim may have been cancelled, but this was the truest Purim we've ever had. The war continues. And the Islamic regime is still entrenched and shows no sign of shifting. More recently, we saw the blockade in Hormuz. You'll know because it's been said so many times that a fifth of the world's oil passes through this extremely narrow waterway south of Iran. And the US has been exerting pressure there in every way it can to try and bring about an end to this war. And so often, isn't it interesting that so much of the world's attention is focused on one tiny area, the Strait of Hormuz, just 20 miles wide. And it has that in common with Israel, doesn't it? Israel, a tiny country in all the territory of the world, and yet all that attention focused on that tiny area with enormous significance. We would expect, of course, to see Russia allied with Iran at the time of the end. There are signs of that happening, as Putin has been cozying up to Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araqi recently. This is likely to have been Putin's game all along, though Trump has been quiet about it. But more evidence keeps turning up of how Russia has been helping Iran for some time. And we believe that alliance will endure and indeed get stronger until that Northern Confederacy comes down. And why will that happen? Why will they come down? Well, they're coming to take a spoil, aren't they? We don't know for certain what that spoil will be. Maybe something we saw in Greenland earlier this year might shed a bit of light on that. You'll remember the sovereignty of Greenland came under threat from Trump's ambitions, which intensified anger from NATO. Partly this was about a deterrent against Russian attacks. But why would this remote corner of the world be of interest to global superpowers anyway? And one reason is that the melting of Arctic ice makes it easier to access rare earth minerals, minerals which Greenland has in abundance. Minerals like niobium, which is used in jet engines and pipelines, which are seen as critical to US national security. Greenland has two major deposits of that one, and that's just one example. Increasingly, our technology relies upon these rare minerals. And those countries which can secure access and refine them at scale are at an advantage. Trump is definitely interested in these minerals, and so is Israel. Now, while Israel lacks significant domestic mineral resources, it does have the deep tech ecosystem that is capable of refining them and processing them and recycling them. And it wants to compete through innovation. Maybe there's a part of the spoil going on there which interests Gog at the time of the end. We need to move on. Our third theme considers how the time of the end in Daniel and Revelation matches up with what we see around us. Let's first consider the Pope. We had a new one of those this year, Pope Leo. Here's King Charles meeting with him in Rome and even praying with him in a move which demonstrates his amazing pull on a Protestant country. Now, you may know that popes choose their own names to reflect some historical continuity or admiration for a previous pope. So what's the significance of Leo? Well, the last pope with that name, Pope Leo XIII, reigned for 25 years and was noteworthy for one thing in particular. He was noteworthy for highlighting the condition of the working classes. He was their hero. He was the Pope of the workers. It was his letters that were sent out that started the powerful movements of Christian democracy and Catholic action to defend the cause of the working man. And that seems to me to be the cry of liberty, equality, and fraternity going out from the most influential voice in the world. Those ideas promoted ever since the French Revolution. I think we can equate that with the frog-like spirit perhaps going out from the mouth of the false prophet. This was the French Revolution Pope 100 years ago. And the current Pope, isn't it interesting, has taken his name, and it seems he's interested in following directly in his mold and doing the same sorts of things in his reign. Well, remember that the iron in the toes of the image is the element of Rome that still exists today. It may not mix with the clay, but it is still strong and influential, and it enables the whole image to stand up. It carries the kingdom of men. And we're still in the days of the iron metal, and we see this power of Rome. There are some powerful Catholics who are very high up in government. Here are two of them, Rubio and Vance, who wasted no opportunity to get cozy with the new pope. But we're not expecting America will be on board with the beast of Europe at the time of the end. So something needs to happen here to change this picture. And as we watched, it did, because Donald Trump stepped in again, didn't he? He stepped in with these words. He called Pope Leo weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy, and started a rift, as best he does. And so he rescued Bible prophecy, literally before our eyes. And that rift still exists between those two of the most powerful figures in the world. What else did we see? We know that the UK voted to come out of Europe 10 years ago this year, a remarkable event as far as prophecy was concerned. And this year, at least, we've seen Keir Starmer try and take the UK back towards the EU. He sought closer ties with Europe, and that's been increasing as his tenure has gone on. He said plenty of times that he wants a closer relationship with Europe. It was part of his manifesto back in 2024. He was going to seek to deepen ties with European friends, neighbours, and allies. And I suspect this could be the ultimate reason why Starmer is ousted from government. He is taking Britain in a direction which doesn't fit with Bible prophecy. That same thing that we all found fascinating 10 years ago when Britain came out of Europe, and he's trying to undo it. We know that he's not going to get very far ultimately. And now we're back in Britain. That brings us on to our final theme as time is going. And that's how we watch society around us. Now, Jesus pointed the disciples to the days of Noah and the time of Lot to help them to understand his coming. And we would argue that was specific to their own day and the coming that was around AD 70. But for 21st century disciples, we need to look at the pattern. These things were recorded so that we might see the pattern. And in both of those cases, Noah and Lot, these themes emerge. It was a self-indulgent society, focused on themselves, with no time for God. The trend of that society was for the way of God to be corrupted. We could add the detail from Daniel 12 that knowledge will increase more and more. That was undoubtedly the case with those peoples in early Genesis as well. And it led, of course, to a sudden and unexpected judgment in those examples. Now, every time God has intervened in the affairs of man and brought a judgment, we've seen the same pattern. Noah and Lot and AD 70, and in our day, it will be just the same. Jesus will come when things are like this, and so these things are relevant to us. So where can we see this pattern in our world today? What is our society like? What place is there for God in our world? Well, our society creates its own God, doesn't it? It worships the creature, the created thing, rather than the creator. Let's just see an example. We take pride in our buildings, don't we? How big can we build? This artist's impression shows a building that is visible from 25 miles away, is 200 meters high, and has been labeled by the press as a temple to extravagance. Of course, you'll know it's actually a football stadium. I've deliberately covered up the name of the team to spare some blushes. Perhaps you might know it anyway, but I'll spare those blushes. But they all look like this in a way, though, don't they? It's not particular to any one team. The point I wanted to make is that it's called and treated by much of society as a temple. And I'm picking on football here. That may make me a villain amongst some of you. Clearly, I could pick on lots of different things to make the same point. It's not just football. Our society creates rival religions and idols out of all sorts of things. Idolatry comes in many, many forms. But this is what we do. We build things like this. And here's another building which was designed to promote man's achievements and glory. It's the Arc de Triomphe, as it's been named by the press. The greatest and most beautiful, he was gushing at this point, triumphal arch anywhere in the world, and there are one or two near Washington, D.C. Now, nothing new about the way this is going is to be celebrated, is it? Nebuchadnezzar once said this about his own buildings in Babylon. There is nothing new about the way we celebrate our buildings. But it's not just buildings, is it? And there is probably nothing that characterizes the world in which we live today more completely than technology. And so I want to think about technology and artificial intelligence in particular with this perspective, because what it does is it showcases this condition of society like nothing else. There is no other example I can put before you that showcases this better. And I need to be clear before I start on this train. Technology itself is neither evil nor good. Morality comes from how it is used. It is an invention. And AI is enabling many, many great things to happen. I'm sure many, if not most of you, use it in your work or in your leisure or in your schooling. The advances in many things are excellent, medicine in particular. But it serves very well as a yardstick for what our society is like, because it has had such a massive impact. It is characteristic of our society today, and it highlights what our world is obsessed with. So I'm not saying we shouldn't use it. I've even used it myself for some of the images in this presentation, but it is this useful yardstick. And of course, it is encouraging a world which is consumed by self-interest and pleasure. And there are so many examples of things that we can put on the screen now. You might remember this trial that took place in February, where the bosses of these really massive corporations, Instagram and YouTube, were on trial because it was claimed that they'd built addiction machines. They'd built things that were designed to make you addicts, that you couldn't bear to be apart from them. And of course, you can see why. People easily get addicted to the short-term gratification offered by AI sites. And at that extreme, with this level of usage, it is clearly going to turn us away from God and his instruction manual and code for living. Not only that, it's going to discourage responsibility. It's going to discourage relationships with other people and ability to perceive other points of view, all sorts of problems. And we live in a world where an online chatbot can tell you anything you want to hear. There are therapist bots which people are becoming addicted to. They will diagnose your problems, and your favorite footballer or pop star or whoever will dish out advice for you, and it will be advice you want to hear because that's what you fed it all along. And that's what people are getting addicted to. Timothy had a warning about society like this. He picked out the itching ears that are eager to hear what pleases them. And we look for just the same thing as a warning in our day. As for corrupting the truth, well, here's a picture of a girl playing the violin in a concentration camp. Thankfully, this one is clearly labelled as fake, but not all of them are. If this wasn't labelled as a fake, would you be able to tell? I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. And it's been shown, in fact, that nearly half of all the news you read online is not true. That means, of course, that we can no longer trust the things that we see on our screens. We live in a society that turns truth into fables, don't we? What is a fable? It's something that is not real, something that is artificial. This is the age we're living in. As Brother Nigel said last night, we need to keep hold of the truth. We need to make sure it's the truth that's with our brothers and sisters. And this isn't going to help with that. Timothy pointed out that increasing knowledge as well. Where does this all lead? Well, it's leading our world to seek absolute control and power through technology, to the extent that the concept of a higher being is not only redundant, but it's laughable. People see AI as God. Our society now attaches the name of God and the idea of God to tech itself. And what was it the serpent said to Adam and Eve? With this knowledge, ye shall be as gods. Just as one society reached up to heaven to make a name for themselves and to create a rival religion, one that was man-made. Well, some reporters are asking, are we doing this again? God didn't stand for it 3,000 years ago. He won't stand for it now. It's enough, some people have said, to herald the time of the end. Not my words, words of the press. It's like we're in Babel again, brothers and sisters, young people, friends. The same place we started at this evening, where Neb's image was replaced. But was described to Daniel, where the metals of the image all started from. That same place where they built a tower in the early days of the world. And we know what happened. The outcome of that story in Babel was that the Lord God confounded their language. Isn't it interesting? Once again, language is the absolute foundation for our technology. You can't have AI. You can't have the internet. You can't have any software running on any computer anywhere without a common language, can you? No doubt the Father could confound all programming languages in a similar way to what happened in Genesis chapter 11. And just imagine the impact globally if he chose to do so. Imagine what would stop working. Just one final thought then. We haven't mentioned earthquakes yet. They're happening more frequently as the days go by, and scientists agree that there is a cataclysmic one still to come. We know that these are the birth pangs of what will happen in Zechariah 14, where the Mount of Olives will cleave. Where we take great comfort, don't we, in knowing that the saints will possess the kingdom soon, in knowing that the future is all planned out and it all makes sense as God's purpose unfolds. What the world would give to have that precious knowledge, that precious treasure, and yet they turn their back on where they can find it. The big one is coming, but the things that are revealed belong to us and our children. And we take comfort and we take great excitement and hope for the future because we see these things. May our Lord come soon.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching. And remember to come back soon.